Hello, and welcome to the Vertical Drop Viking. I'm Josef, and today I'm building a tier list for all the roller coasters at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio. My initial plan was to rank these coasters, but I found that to be a more difficult task than when I initially set out. While most anybody you ask will tell you that Steel Vengeance is a better ride than, say, Valraven or Rougarou, I personally have a hard time comparing them head to head in this manner. These rides aren't trying to do the same thing. Valraven and Steel Vengeance aren't trying to give you a similar ride experience. And so quantifying these ride experiences, boiling them down to just numbers and then putting them in a list from highest number to lowest number, doesn't seem as informative to me as a tier list. So for this list, I'm going to be explaining what I think each ride is trying to do. Then I'm going to give it a ranking from S all the way down to F on how well it accomplishes what it's trying to do for its riders. Now, all that being said, I do have to introduce these rides in some order. And luckily for me, my number one son is not as shy about ranking the coasters from 1 to 18 as I am. So not only is this my tier list, but this is my son's ranking from worst to best. Let's dive into it. At number 18, we have the Cedar Creek Mine Ride. This is a very old ride. This is tubular steel on a wooden support structure, like Gemini across the Midway. Now, mine train rides were very popular during the last century. They don't get built nearly as often nowadays, and if they do get built nowadays, they're often strictly kiddie rides. The mine train as an adult thrill ride phenomenon has sort of died off since the coaster wars, really. And these mine train rides are mostly designed to give you a feeling of being out of control, as if you were on an actual mine cart in old western prospecting times, after the advent of trains, but before the advent of train safety. Now, that being said, the Cedar Creek Mine Ride doesn't really feel all that out of control. It has some jankiness to it, that stereotypical aero jankiness in the transitions especially. The helix right at the end of the ride gives you some pretty good positive G's, but overall it's a pretty slow-paced ride. Drop's not much to talk about. There are 2 lift hills on this ride, so when you're done with the first half of the ride, the pacing is completely obliterated and you are dragged slowly up another hill. The scenery on this ride is great. There's not a whole lot of water interactions at Cedar Point besides that tiny drop on Cedar Creek Mine Ride out over the water. And it's got, up until Gatekeeper was installed, probably the best head chopper effect in the park when you duck underneath this section of track. It's a rough ride. The roughness and jankiness and the small trains don't really contribute to the out of control feeling that a mine train is supposed to inspire. For that reason, I'm going to start Cedar Creek out on the list in the D tier. At number 17, we have Wilderness Run. Now, this is one of the 2 kid coasters in the park. It is very basic. It's a great first coaster for very small kids. It's not a top tier kid ride by any means, especially nowadays with the Gravity Group coming out with these really great kid coasters and family coasters. With the advent of the family coaster trend that we're seeing all over the world right now, older kid coasters like this are really starting to show their age. Now, that said, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just when you hold it up against the other coasters that are being offered for this age range, for this size range, Wilderness Run doesn't hold up. Number 16 is Woodstock Express. This is the other kid coaster in the park. This has a much more interesting layout than Wilderness Run has. Helixes and some bunny hills. Essentially not trying to do anything that much more different than Wilderness Run, but just a better kid coaster, a more solid kid coaster. It's trying to offer entry-level thrills, and it does so. There's nothing spectacular about it. It could use maybe a little more introductory airtime, a little less reliance on the helixes. especially considering that on modern coasters, helixes are typically put in to give you strong positive Gs. This coaster never reaches enough speed to make you undergo any sort of positive Gs. It's a middle-of-the-road coaster. Again, not as good as the Gravity Group's current offerings for families or Vekoma's current offerings for families. Even B&M's allegedly rattly current offerings for families. So for that reason, I'm going to put Woodstock Express in the B tier. Coming up at number 15, we have Rougarou. Now, my son was really looking forward to riding Rougarou. It was closed when we went in August, and it was closed when we went on closing day. For that reason, it's down here towards the bottom. Not because he didn't like the ride, but because he wasn't able to experience it. Now, I really enjoyed Rougarou. I think that there's not a whole lot of other offerings in the park that really show off the old school B&M graceful looping. The sort of thing that they were known for when they were building their stand-up models. This was originally a stand-up model, in case you're unaware, and was converted into a floorless model in the 2000s when it was rebranded to Rougarou. Now, Rougarou has some awesome elements. I really love that first loop-de-loop. I think the sideways loop later in the layout is super cool. Very unique, very B&M. One of my favorite parts about Rougarou that doesn't nearly get talked about is the low-to-the-ground section on the return trip. Even though this is not a particularly fast coaster, when you're banking so close to the ground, you really get a sense of speed. Even if speed isn't really what you're undergoing. 35 miles an hour this close to the ground feels a lot faster than 50 miles an hour 30 feet up. In the same way that when you're flying in an airplane at 500 miles an hour, the ground seems to be creeping underneath you, when really you are tearing through faster than you'll likely travel on anything else in your life. The perspective keeps things relative. Now, with all that said, Rougarou's stats aren't impressive. Coaster enthusiasts will be the first one to tell you that it feels like a stand-up layout, and that the floorless conversions aren't always successful in creating thrilling experiences. I think that Rougarou is a pleasant ride. It's an enjoyable ride. It shouldn't be ranked as a high thrill ride like it is. I think Rougarou is the king of the family thrill at Cedar Point. But it does have its detractors, and it's hard to argue with some of the arguments. For starters, the over-the-shoulder restraints that they used on these trains are notorious for taking shorter riders and rattling their head back and forth. Now, I've never had this problem, but I'm, again, too tall. Like they've tried to disqualify me from riding Millennium Force twice this season because I am too tall to ride Millennium Force. But I can limbo, so don't worry about it. It is hard for me to say that I think that Rougarou is the king of family thrill at Cedar Point when your kids are going to bounce their ears off the over-the-shoulder restraints unless they have a stronger neck. So if you got a little kid that's in wrestling, he's going to love Rougarou. If your kid's not very athletic and he's, just over the height limit, if he's 4'3", 4'4" or something, he or she might be bouncing his or her ears off of the over-the-shoulder restraints, which are hard plastic, and they're going to tell you they don't like roller coasters. So there's a give and take there. For that reason, I'm going to put Rougarou in the B tier. It's a great looper. It's a great family thrill ride. It's got its problems, and its problems are hard to ignore. At number 14, we have the Blue Streak. Now, this was my first roller coaster ever. I have a special soft spot in my heart for this roller coaster. I always will. I was very scared when I got brought onto it, excited but scared. It was a whole new experience when I rode it some 25, 26 years ago. And I was very excited to bring my son onto it to continue the tradition. My dad brought me onto it when I was, about to be a teenager, and I get to bring my son on it when he's a teenager. It's exciting. All the soft spots in my heart can't save this ride from Cedar Point maintenance over the last few years. This is an entirely wooden coaster on a beach, on a peninsula, in a freshwater sea that freezes in November and thaws out in May. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you understand. The wind coming off of Lake Erie has not done any favors for Blue Streak. The heavy trains rolling over it all summer long has not done any favors to Blue Streak. It is in rough shape. I don't think that just a retrack is going to fix it. I think that there's structural issues with Blue Streak. It feels like there are potholes growing in Blue Streak. It was pretty rough in August, and when I came back in September and rode it with my friends, it was among the rougher wooden roller coasters I've ever ridden. Blue Streak is just as rough as Wolverine Wildcat this year. Now, I saw online recently that they're redoing the trains, at least doing an overhaul of the existing trains. So maybe that will help for next season. But not only is it going to need a full wooden retrack, but there's definitely some structural issues going on with Blue Streak. It is one of the more rattly experiences that you can have. Definitely the most rattly experience you can have in the park. Blue Streak is in rough shape. It can be turned around, but I don't know if they're going to. And for that reason, I'm going to have to put it at the C tier. At 13, we have the Spinning Wild Mouse coaster on the boardwalk. Now, this is the one credit in the park that my son has that I don't have. I've never gotten to ride this. I'm not overly excited to ride it. I'm not big on spinning rides. I can say that looking at it from the outside, it looks less impressive than a lot of other wild mouse coasters I've seen. I mean, besides the spinning element, I haven't seen a lot of other spinning. I know there are other spinning wild mouses like Ragin' Cajun. I know that there exist. But when you compare the spinning wild mouse at Cedar Point to Ragin' Cajun, it comes up drastically short in a lot of ways. This is the most basic wild mouse layout that you can. This is like an off-the-shelf wild mouse layout that happens to spin around. And it draws some of the longest lines in the park. Obviously, the trains can only hold 4 people at a time. You know, it's just a car, not a train, really. So that causes a certain capacity back up. And combine that with the fact that a majority of the ridership are kids. Some of these kids are going to need to hear instructions from the ride operator 2 or 3 times before they follow them. Get back behind that line. Don't stand up yet. Don't sit down yet. When the main ridership of the ride is kids, you're going to bump into these problems. A lot more than the rides where the height minimum is closer to 5 feet. Plus, while you're in line, they're going to yell random numbers at you, and they're not even the funny numbers. They're funny numbers to them, but it's like a couple shy from our funny numbers. So I don't want to put this at the bottom just because it's a lackluster wild mouse. It draws in the kids that it's trying to draw in. It gives one of the only spinning experiences that you can get at Cedar Point. But it's not a Cedar Point class ride. You'd think that at the park that is always out to break records and have world firsts, that they'd have the biggest spinning wild mouse, or at least the most thrilling spinning wild mouse, or at least the most something spinning wild mouse, and not just that off-the-shelf spinning wild mouse. And so, middle-of-the-road coaster, I'm going to give it a middle-of-the-road ranking and put it right at C. At number 12, we have Gemini. I really like Gemini. It's another one of those coasters that I got to ride on day one of my enthusiast journey back in 2000 or 2001. It is definitely in rough shape. This is another aero coaster with tubular steel track on a wooden support structure. Another one that's slowly rotting while we watch. Aero's not around to sell them replacement parts or to fix anything that goes wrong. And so it's just been up to Cedar Point to find contractors to keep this thing in operation. And the last couple of years, by all accounts, it has not been in operation. Either it's sat completely dormant or one side has been running. And it seems to be mostly the red side that's been running. The blue side wasn't running any of the 3 times that I went this season. And the red side was only running one of those 3 times. So when all season your racing coaster isn't racing, you got a problem on your hands. Especially when you're on a tier list where some bald guy is trying to decide how well your coaster does what it's trying to do. How well does your racing coaster race? It doesn't. For that reason, I'm going to put Gemini at a C. There's nothing wrong with the ride experience. It's just you can't ride it. At number 11, Sun number 1 has got Corkscrew. Corkscrew was my first inverting coaster way back 25, 26 years ago, however long it was. I'm pretty sure it was 2001. It's my first aero looper, and I've come to enjoy some aero loopers in the meantime. And out of the aero loopers that I've ridden, this one does have a pretty cool layout. That first airtime hill after the drop is surprisingly good ejector airtime, and really no matter what seat you ride in. And then there's not only a corkscrew, as the name implies, but a vertical loop as well, which you can't find on a lot of older corkscrews from Aero. The one at Michigan's Adventure stands out as it's just up the hill, down the hill, around corkscrew, and you're home. There's more interesting elements at the Cedar Point corkscrew than there is in the Michigan's Adventure one. Now that said, the ride at Cedar Point is in rough shape. I don't know how Michigan's Adventure had a smoother corkscrew than Cedar Point this year. I think there may have been some retracking involved. The Michigan's Adventure one got completely repainted at least, so possibly it had some new steel or some new steel in places, some repairs. My ride on the Michigan's Adventure corkscrew this year was much, much smoother than my ride on Cedar Point's corkscrew. I think this ride needs a full retrack. Now, I hear a lot of people talking about this ride getting replaced. I don't think it's going to get replaced. If you rip corkscrew out of the middle of the midway, then what? You're not going to put anything else there. Like, you're not going to build another ride that interacts with the existing landscape and the existing walkways in the way that this 50-year-old ride does. You built the walkways and the rest of it around corkscrew. Doing it the other way around is going to be extremely difficult, and I'd be very surprised if they even try. The restraints on this are rough. They ratchet down like a vest restraint on a wing coaster, and they are old, hard plastic. Out of a whole day of riding roller coasters at Cedar Point, this is one of the only two that left marks on me. And the other one left marks on me, but it was worth it. Unless Cedar Point can figure out some way to make this ride a little more tolerable, maybe a lap bar. People act like it's insane to have a lap bar on inverted rides. It happens all the time, all over the world. People love it. Nobody falls out. I think a lap bar would go a long ways to fixing corkscrew, but a retrack is also definitely necessary. For that reason, I'm going to put it way down in the D tier. The layout, again, great layout for an aero looper. Everything else about the ride comes up short. At number 10, we have Iron Dragon. This is another aero. So another one where Aero can't help you fix it. Aero can't sell you parts. Aero can't. You're on your own. And for that reason, I think Iron Dragon's days are numbered. A lot of the other Aero suspended coasters like this are already torn down. And Iron Dragon and Rougarou together, some older, less ridden coasters, right in the middle of the park, right across from the brand new Siren's Curse, right across from the fan favorite Valraven. Prime real estate for replacement. Now, I think Iron Dragon is an enjoyable enough ride, but it does sort of have a glorified monorail experience going on. If it's trying to be thrilling, it comes up short. The forces are not extreme in any way. This is one of the only rides at Cedar Point where I had my drink cup, and I was like, I gotta find a place to throw this away. And the ride op's like, you can take it. And I said, what? Like, if I pull my phone out, you're gonna call the cops, but I can have my agua fresca. Like, doesn't make it make sense. I guess it makes sense because the ride doesn't really do a whole lot. The swinging pendulum motion of it is fun. I think it's fun. Not exciting, not thrilling, but fun. Like, in the way that a flat ride that's not scary or forceful can still be fun. As far as monorails go, Iron Dragon's the best monorail out there. But it's not trying to be a monorail. It's trying to be a family thrill coaster. All right, we're moving into number 9. This is the first point where me and my son really diverge in opinion. His number 9 coaster is Magnum XL 200. I love Magnum. I will forever be a Magnum defender. I'll forever be a Magnum enjoyer. When they tear Magnum down, they'll have to unchain me from it first. I love the Magnum. It's one of the best rides in the park. Nothing does what the Magnum does. Nothing in the park does what the Magnum does. Nothing outside of the park does what the Magnum does. Arrow didn't know what they were doing when they made the Magnum. They figured out what they were doing after, and once they figured out what they were doing, they never made another ride on this tier ever again. This is Arrow's masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. All the things that somebody might view as a defect on Magnum, I view as a feature. I love the scariness of the banking transitions. I love that it feels like you shouldn't be doing it. The entire ride feels like you shouldn't be doing it. No other roller coaster really has that. To me, we talked earlier about how a mine train is supposed to feel out of control. Magnum feels out of control to me. The huge camelbacks right off that long climb. The jankiness of turning left after the second one. The insane roar of the tunnels. The jankiness of the transition at the far end that makes you feel like you're putting forces on this roller coaster that it's going to remember is so memorable. Then this strange reverse helix where you went straight into it, but you're gonna come all the way left and still be left when you're coming out of it. More tunnels and the famous triangle airtime hills on the return trip. I've heard people say that they only enjoy riding Magnum stapled because of these triangle airtime hills. But I personally love the feeling. It feels like they're trying to rip you out of the seat. Every single one of them feels like it's trying to rip you out of the seat. And then a night ride with that last airtime hill in that completely illuminated tunnel. It's a one-of-a-kind roller coaster experience. I can't sing Magnum's praises enough. So whether or not Sun number 1 feels the same way, I'm putting Magnum as our first S-tier coaster at Cedar Point. And it's chronologically the first S-tier coaster at Cedar Point as well, as far as I'm concerned. You may notice that all the coasters older than 1989 have already been touched on this list. And that's my son's ranking, not mine. So I may be onto something here. In a move that's certain to upset coaster nerds around the world, Sun number 1 has put Steel Vengeance at number 8. This is commonly accepted as the best roller coaster in the world. I have a hard time arguing with that. As far as airtime goes, it's unmatched, unbeatable. If anybody does beat it, I would have money that it will be Rocky Mountain Construction, the people who did the conversion and made Steel Vengeance in the first place. Many people online say that the only coaster that gives it a run for its money is the newer Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens. I haven't had an opportunity to ride Iron Gwazi yet, and so this is definitely my favorite RMC. This is my favorite airtime machine. This is trying to do airtime, and it does it better than anything else. For that, easy S tier for me. At number 7, Sun number 1 is ranked Millennium Force. Now, I have a hard time agreeing with him with this being so low. But again, I disagree with Steel Vengeance being so low as well. Millennium Force is Cedar Point's second offering in the Coaster Wars. They had the tallest with Magnum, and then they didn't have the tallest for some time. And then 11 years later, the Millennium Force was built, and they had the tallest for, well, as long as they had it. Coaster Wars are still raging on today, and we're only a month away from Six Flags Qadia's opening, where it continues on. Just like now, Intamin is the culprit for this, and the idea is speed and forces. Now, speed, Millennium Force definitely has speed, and it's hard to argue with that. But when it comes to forces, I think Millennium Force comes up short. Some people even out there call it Millennium Forceless, and there's a whole subgenre of ride photos, people pretending to sleep through the tunnel so that they can be napping while they ride Millennium Forceless. I don't agree. I don't think that it's forceless. But after that first overbank turn, which again, I've said before, I'll say again, I think that first overbank turn is the best sustained positive G moment in the park. After that, G's are missing. There's one good airtime hill, and I've gotten airtime on it in the front and in the back, and never in the middle. And after that, it's a lot more overbanks, but you don't have the speed off the first drop that you did that made that first overbank work so hard. You're just going fast and turning sideways, and going fast and turning sideways. You get some laterals, but you'd think that banking all the way into these turns would continue to provide the sustained positive Gs, and that you'd get more moments where you might gray out. But I've only ever grayed out on Millennium Force coming up that first overbank turn. And the positive Gs on that are great, but you can't call it an S tier ride when it only does what it's trying to do in the first half. It's still, I think, one of the better rides in the park. It's one of the scariest rides in the park, especially that first lift hill. I've said many, many times that lift hill is one of the scariest parts in the park. That going up a 300 something foot hill twice as fast as you ride any of the other chain lifts, and it still takes just as long. It's really something. And the first drop is great. The positives of this ride are enough to keep it from the lower tiers, but it failing to provide forces throughout keep it from being an S tier ride. For that reason, I put Millennium Force in the A tier. Number 6 is Val Raven. Now, Val Raven is one of my personal favorite rides. I really, really love the vertical drop, obviously, but sustained floater that you get on Val Raven through all of its elements. Nothing else in the park makes you feel like you are flying in the same way that Val Raven does. I'd say that only Gatekeeper is trying, but it doesn't succeed. None of the other rides are really going for that sense of floaty flight. And it's possible that if Cedar Point had invested in, say, a Flying Dutchman or B&M Flyer, that this position would be taken. But that's not the reality that we find ourselves in. And today, I think Val Raven provides the best floater, the best, slower, more graceful inversions in the park. And then, on top of all that, the last time that I went and rode Val Raven, they turned the mid-course brake run off because it was cold outside and very low staffing. They just stacked trains up at the back of the brake run. There were 2 trains stacked up on the final brakes behind us. They were ripping through the layout. And it was one of the best roller coaster rides I've ever had. I know what this ride's capable of. And that said, it doesn't always do it. It doesn't always live up to its full potential. But even on a regular operating day, if you want to go into this park and have a graceful, soaring, flying experience, it's not super fast, not super forceful. Again, great positives at the bottom of the parabola, but not overly super forceful. And just an amazing visual spectacle. Then I have to recommend Val Raven. It doesn't get a lot of love from coaster enthusiasts, but many of them hate the vest restraints, which, as far as I can tell, the vest restraints are very restrictive for smaller riders. I'm as big as they'll let get on the coaster, and the vest restraints on Val Raven I find to be wonderful, especially going down that first drop. The vest gives for me. If it doesn't give for you, I definitely understand why you don't like it. If it didn't give for me, I wouldn't like it either. In fact, we'll be getting to that in the next entry. So all that said, one of my favorite coasters, I have to put Val Raven at the S tier. And really, if the Vertical Drop Viking didn't put Val Raven in the S tier, the Viking-themed vertical coaster at Cedar Point, who would I be? At number 5, we have Gatekeeper. Now, my son putting Gatekeeper above Val Raven and above Millennium Force, a little bit of the slap in the face to me, but I'm not offended. He's free to have his own opinion on it. I really, really do think Gatekeeper is a wonderful ride. The visual spectacle of it being at the front gate is often talked about as one of the best front gate interactions in the world. I do hear some good things about some others. I hear some people say that there are better front gate interactions than Gatekeeper, but not many. Gatekeeper has one of the coolest first drops in the park with its wing over drop. There's not a whole lot of places in the park where you get that experience. It definitely is reminiscent of the 0G roll on Valraven, the way that most of the riders are on either wing, and you have this huge rotational movement that translates to more to floater than it does to any sort of ejector. Gatekeeper is not trying to give you strong airtime, even on its hills. Gatekeeper is an inversion machine. Extremely graceful one at that. And Gatekeeper is the king of the head chopper effect. When I first rode this coaster, I may or may not have noticed a sign in the station that said I was too tall to ride it, but nobody noticed besides me, and so I rode it. But Gatekeeper was one of the few rides that I went into completely blind. All I knew about it was that it was at the gate and that it was a wing coaster. I didn't know just how often it was going to make me feel like I was going to smack my head or feet into the ride structure. And when you just read a sign that says you have to be a couple inches shorter than you to ride this ride, and then you see the ride structure coming at your face, you get a whole extra helping of fear, a whole dish of it. Here's my ride photo from the first time I rode Gatekeeper, and in no other ride photo, in no other roller coaster will you see this level of defensiveness from me. I've ridden it several times since then, and I'm very relaxed on it now that I know it's hustle. But that first ride on Gatekeeper, I wish I could go back and ride it for the first time again, because I really was terrified, and that's worth the price of admission. Now, there are a couple of things I can knock against this coaster. One of them, I mentioned earlier that the vest restraints on Valraven don't bother me at all. The vest restraints on Gatekeeper are not created equal. They ratchet down on you pretty much no matter what you do. It's a lot easier for me to hold my Valraven vest exactly where I need it to be to get airtime on that last hill and to really fully experience all the floater that Valraven has to offer, all that 0G. Gatekeeper, that thing wants to give you a hug. And I feel like that thing is getting tighter on me in the brake run when I'm not doing anything. It's a very restrictive restraint. It doesn't give like the Valraven one does, just an inferior restraint in general. To top that off, there are now wing coasters with similar stats here in the US that have launches. Following their Cedar Point logic from earlier, if you have a wing coaster at Cedar Point and it's still the biggest, but it's not the baddest, well, you have a little bit of a problem. And I don't think that this layout would benefit at all from a launch. You don't want to launch up to a wing over dive. It might be a little unfair to knock Gatekeeper down a couple of points just because there are better wing coasters in the world that are trying to do something slightly different, but I can't ignore it. That, combined with the restrictive ratcheting vest restraints and the very lackluster finale, mean I have to knock Gatekeeper down from S to A tier. It does everything it's trying to do, but it has a couple of glaring issues. At number 4, we have Maverick. This is a top tier ride. I haven't had the pleasure of riding Velocicoaster yet. By all accounts, it's a better version of this, but this is a very special ride. This is a great ride. This is my first launched coaster back in 2009, 2010, when it was still fairly new. It was the longest wait in the park then. It's the longest wait in the park today on a lot of days. Its capacity is down lower than Siren's Curse's capacity, even though it runs 4 trains, because those trains have a very, very small ridership capacity. Now, when you have a ride that is exciting, thrilling, a little bit scary, and everybody loves it, everybody wants to ride it, and the capacity is low, you get long lines. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about what the ride's trying to do and how well it does it. Maverick is about speed, Maverick is about rolls, strong laterals, decent airtime, and Maverick does all these things with a vengeance. Maverick's first launch is awesome, and it's still sort of reminiscent of a lift hill coaster. Not all launched coasters start with their biggest hill anymore. They don't have to. Maverick still does. It's very cool. Sheer vertical drop. Not a long one, but it's a sheer vertical drop. I'm a sucker for a vertical drop. And then it puts you through one of the most non-stop, quick, whippy, intense experiences in Cedar Point. On top of that, it's themed. And I'm not just talking about a throne out front and they say Viking stuff when you launch, like the theme of Valraven. Maverick is themed with a whole story and interaction with Steel Vengeance's story. That's unheard of at this park, and it's a good thing that they got that in before Six Flags became the name on the mailbox, because it's completely unheard of at a Six Flags park. It's some of the best theming in the park, one of the best ride experiences in the park, constantly intense, incredible pacing. The middle of Raptor is a brake run. The middle of Gatekeeper is a brake run. The middle of Valraven, in fact, the 1/3 of the way into Valraven, is a brake run. The middle of Maverick is the best launch in the ride. Way better than the initial launch. Way more exciting. And then if you happen to be lucky enough, like I was, to get a ride on Maverick where they turn the trim brakes off, the airtime on the hill after that second launch is absolutely incredible. It's a great ride. S-tier ride, easy. All right, we're entering the top 3. I'm very surprised to see this unseated. When we went in August, this was his favorite, but number one son put Raptor at number 3. Raptor is an incredible ride. It's the oldest B&M in the park. This is one of the best B&M inverts in the world, and it's 30 years old. It'll be 32 this season coming out. It is an iconic ride. One of the most intense rides in the park. It definitely has the most intense laterals, I think. The rolling inversions on Raptor absolutely tear you around the track, even more so than Maverick does. Raptor is just outright intensity from start to finish. Even the tiny little brake run at the top makes you think that maybe you're going to get a reprieve, but then it sends you into the hardest helix in the entire park, and one of the only places in the park that gives Millennium Force a run for its money on sustained positive Gs. Raptor grabs you by the midsection and swings you around until your feet are full of all your blood, and it's a wonderful, wonderful time. It's the loudest coaster in the park, and I love the sound so much. It's my text message ringtone. I think Raptor is a perfect ride. I can't think of a mean thing to say about Raptor, and so I won't. S tier. At number 2, we have the newest addition at Cedar Point, the Siren's Curse. Now, I just did a full video review of this, so if you're interested in that, please check out the rest of my channel. I'll put it right up here. But if you don't have time for that, I make it short and sweet and say that Sirens has a perfect ride experience. Some of the least dead time in the park. Only Maverick and Raptor are on par with Siren's Curse for the pacing and non-stop intensity of the layout. Siren's Curse has its gimmick. Its gimmick hits hard. I'm not here to poo-poo on its gimmick. The gimmick works, and I like it. You get dangled by your sternum. Weird-ish Vekoma vest restraints. You definitely need the vest restraints on this. There's no way that a lap bar would do, because you are dangling by these. The vest is like a spider web holding you up from plummeting down to your doom. And then after about 6 seconds of dangling precariously on the edge of this cliff, you corkscrew down and start a very intense layout. There's not a lot of strong G-forces on this ride. There's good laterals, but not strong anything. No sustained positives, no real positives to speak of at all. Good airtime, respectable airtime on the top of It's hills and hops. Nothing trying to throw you out of your seat like Steel Vengeance. What it's trying to do is present you with its gimmick. It does that. And then after its gimmick, give you a intense and rapid fire ride that's not overly long. It does all of that. It does a great job of doing it. I talk a lot in my review video about the capacity of this ride. It's just as bad as Maverick's, and it's much newer than Maverick, almost 20 years newer than Maverick. So its capacity problems are exacerbated by its newness, its freshness. Everyone wants to ride this. Even people who don't know what it's like want to ride it because it's new. People come back to Maverick because they know it's great. People are still finding out that Siren's Curse is great today. And so it only running 1,000 potential riders an hour, and those are perfect riders who follow all instructions and know exactly where to be, where they're supposed to sit. They're riders that don't exist. It's a major point against this coaster. But again, that's not what this video is about. I'm going to refrain from putting it at the S tier just because it's a very short ride compared to the other rides at Cedar Point. The shortness of the layout, the sort of mildness of the vertical G's, those are going to keep it out of the S tier for me. But again, this is a very high A tier ride. Top of the A tier. I'm a big fan of Siren's Curse. And last, but certainly, definitely not least, my son has Top Thrill 2 as his number one coaster at Cedar Point, and his number one coaster ever, because he likes it better than all the ones at Michigan's Adventure. What is there to say about Top Thrill 2? This is one of the few coasters where I don't think you need me to tell you what it's trying to do. The fastest and the tallest. And that's that. Now, in its initial form as Top Thrill Dragster, son number one never got to ride it. I rode it many, many times as Top Thrill Dragster, and I loved it. But Top Thrill Dragster does not hold a candle to Top Thrill 2. The experience of tearing backwards, the deliberate rollback, the rollback that everyone wanted on Top Thrill Dragster is a part of the ride. Not only are you rolling back, but you're rolling back all the way through the station. They have the track changed over so that by the time that you're coming backwards, you're not going to interact with the station whatsoever. You're going to fly past it at 100 miles an hour backwards and go 400 feet up a spike and float there for what feels like forever, and then come tearing back down like a bat out of hell. The experience for me of riding this with my number one son, even though he was terrified to get on it, and watching him overcome his fear and getting to be a part of that with him, is something that I will remember for my entire life. I already loved this coaster before he was ever born, when it was Dragster, and now that he's becoming a young man and he's conquered it, and I got to conquer it right there with him, this is an experience that I'll cherish forever. But not even talking about my personal subjective experiences, there's nothing bad to say about this coaster unless you're expecting it to do something it doesn't do. Now, with the original layout of just Top Thrill Dragster, it would be easy to point to King Ka and say, well, look, there's a bigger one, and it has an airtime hill. This doesn't have an airtime hill. This is the worst one. I never got to ride King Ka, and it's in a pile somewhere, being melted down for scrap, most likely. And so I'm not here to compare it with King Ka or its airtime hill. I'm here to figure out what it's trying to do and tell you how well it does it. And this thing puts you through forces that you can find nowhere else in the park. And honestly, just the experience alone. If there was a flat ride that just did the back half, that there was a flat ride that was just a reverse spike that sent you up 400 feet and then brought you back, it would be a top tier flat ride. It's the most unique and exhilarating experience, completely worth the price of admission. The feeling that your guts give you when you are going 100 miles an hour up and backwards it can't be explained. It has to be experienced. And for this reason, Top Thrill 2, my son's #1 coaster at Cedar Point, is going to be at the top of the S tier for me, right there with my other favorites. So that's it. That's all 18 coasters at Cedar Point. What did I get wrong? Did I put your favorite too low? Do you disagree with some of my favorites being so high? Tell me down in the comments about how Valraven's trash. I promise I'll argue with you. I have nothing better to do. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, checking out my channel, and giving it a subscribe. It helps a lot in growing my audience. And it'll allow me to invade your homepage next week with more coaster content. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you very, very much. I've been Josef. Vertical Drop Viking out.